Hope everyone's doing well. Um, so this is going to be a bit tricky because I'm reacting somewhat to discourse and things that are taking place online, which probably in the grand scheme of things are not very meaningful, but have in fact given me a good deal to consider. Um, Before, I guess, getting too deep in, um, I'll just give a brief descriptor of my own, where my own politics kind of lie at this given moment. I've always been, I'd say, someone who leans left, even though I grew up in a very conservative Christian household. Going back as far as Occupy, where I went to some of the protests and kind of engaged in that as around 17 or 18 years old. Anyways, moving on from there, I probably had, well, I definitely had like an anti SJW phase uh, because of like Tumblr and things like that, but also just my own, I guess, capacity for swallowing bullshit and being a reactionary in some degree. But I always leaned pretty left. Anyway, so coming to where I'm at now, I would say I consider myself a leftist. I don't have a category of which I put myself into. I've recently turned to calling myself a Sartrean socialist, which can mean a lot of things. But there's your basic. I consider myself a leftist. Whatever that means, I don't know. Maybe it means nothing to you. But with all that said, another thing to um, set the table for this discussion here is that we're going to be talking about the good old Biden discourse. Should you vote for Joe Biden? Should you vote third party? Should you not vote at all? That is the first question we will be addressing. From there, we'll be talking about some things that are frankly more interesting, but that I have less of an answer for. And am still really in the process of trying to figure out. And I think the latter part of this conversation is the more important one, and is also the one that should be getting discussed, but isn't because Biden discourse. Um, so from my perspective, should you vote for Joe Biden in the 2020 election? Yeah, yeah. I mean, simply put, you should. I don't know that I consider myself a utilitarian, but I do empathize with the utilitarian argument of harm reduction, and voting for Biden over Trump because Trump is a very dangerous, bordering on, if not explicitly fascist, brain dead troglodyte who has caused insane harm to people domestically as well as internationally in his 3+ years of being president. So yeah, you should vote for Joe Biden. We'll get into the kind of the nuances of that in just a second. Some would say if you're not in a swing state, you're less compelled to vote, or that you should vote third party. I don't really. I mean, if you don't feel compelled to vote, then I have something for that. But voting third party in America, like I don't necessarily fundamentally disagree with that, but I don't like maybe someone else knows, but I don't know of any leftist or left sympathizing third party candidates or anything that are running in 2020. Maybe there's somebody that you could potentially vote for, but I don't know that it would be worth it. Um, and if you're in a swing state, you absolutely should vote for Biden. However, now let's say you don't want to vote for Biden at all, and you're not in a swing state, you're in a blue state. Um, if you want not to do not want to vote for Biden on the basis of things like personal experiences with punitive justice or sexual harassment or things of that nature which make you feel um, a certain repulsion attached to Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, I am not going to compel you to the point of incessant nagging that you should reconsider. Uh, I think it is within the general public's interest to reconsider that and to consider voting. But more importantly, in my opinion here, is to vote. Period. Even if you don't vote for Joe Biden, if you just don't even vote for the president in 2020, in the November election, I think it's really important to vote down ballot, um, to get engaged with local politics, to try and read in or look into who are some local politicians who are progressive or progressive leaning or even explicitly socialist, uh, would be great. So for you to go in and vote for those people, I think is really valuable and really important. And it's something I need to be better about. My personal issue is I keep moving. So my precinct changes, and I always find myself like lost and confused with who are my representatives and things like that nature. But I've kind of settled down where I am now, so hopefully that stays that way for a bit. But regardless, I'm going to vote, and I vote every time I have the ability to do so. Every time a local election or just an election period comes up that I can partake in. I think we're certainly not past the need for engagement with electoral politics. Um, like we're not past the need for that. I still think that's very important on the hierarchy of engaging with modern politics. So voting down ballot is really valuable, really important, and that is something I would compel anyone and everyone to do, regardless of if you're voting for Joe Biden or third party or whatever. As well as usually, in my understanding, with local elections and voting locally, there tends to be bills or policies that are actually included on the ballot that you fill out, as well as local people running for different forms of office. So like police chiefs, like school administrators might be correct. I could be wrong, but things like that. These are other things to take into account and to look into and to see who and what is going to be available to vote on locally for you. I think that's really important, and whether or not that's even a part of the November ballot for you might depend on where you're at. I can't say with a certainty what will be there. If you'd like help trying to figure these things out, I'm not the most technically savvy person, but I'd be willing to help if you reach out and see what I can do. I've had to do this several times over when I've gone to vote. I try to look into, who it is I want to vote for when I'm voting locally. So yeah, all that being said, voting down ballot is really important, really valuable, and largely that is to me one of the most important things you can do because I think ultimately, I mean, my effect on people is extremely minuscule. But even without my effect on people, and just in general, I don't know. Hmm, whoop. I'd rather not make predictions about who is going to win in November. But how do I put this? I think I've lost my train of thought there. Sorry about that. Oh, jeez. It's very awkward doing this in total silence. Let me cut something on really light. One second, sorry. Okay, hopefully that's not too apparent for you guys. So that's essentially my take on the question of whether or not you should vote for Biden. I think it's broadly a yes. I think it is within the country's best interest, and that's that. Okay, so what is the current discourse? What are people angry about, frustrated about? Why am I even doing this impromptu stream? Well, I can't really play the video, um, but I can talk about it. I think. I don't know. But Vaush is a pretty popular political streamer, and he has been pretty avid in his support of Joe Biden. He did a video very shortly after Bernie dropped out of the race, showing his sympathies for fellow leftists who were, within reason, fairly disappointed by Bernie dropping out and by the circumstances which occurred. And he expressed his sympathies and said, look, guys, this really sucks. This is not what we wanted. But, give yourselves time to be upset, to be frustrated, and to get that out. But come election time, let's get in there and let's vote for Biden. It was essentially his thesis in that video. This was obviously a couple months ago, and I thought that was a fairly fine video. I had no major disagreements with it, and I felt like it was pretty good. Okay, so fast forward to yesterday, or maybe it was before yesterday. I don't know. Vaush puts out a video titled something like "Leftists Can't Play the Politics Game," something like that. And in this video, I want to use this video in a way as a kind of a vessel for the broader discussion, which is kind of still happening, but is mutated and evolved from previous discussions. But essentially, Vaush is reacting to leftists on Twitter and online who are pretty critical of Joe Biden and have become even more critical of Joe Biden again in the wake of him picking Kamala Harris as his VP. So a lot of these leftists are are doomer pilled, they're jaded, they're disenfranchised and frustrated by the system, and some of them are advocating like, hey, don't even go and vote, like fuck this, like fuck the system, the shit is rigged, it's all a joke. Okay, Vaush plainly disagrees. Well, he doesn't disagree with the idea that things are very bad and not how they ideally would be, to put it politely. However, in this video, he kind of goes full attack dog on these mostly unnamed leftists. He has a tweet up on the screen for most of the video and kind of dumps on this person, but this person was supposed to act as a vessel for a broader discussion happening, which in the video begins with people chastising Bernie. And I think there have been a lot of unfair critiques of Bernie in the wake of him pulling out, dropping out. Jesus Christ, I'm five. Of him pulling out of the race. I think there's been a lot of people like dunking on Bernie and people being like, society has surpassed their need for Bernie Sanders, or Bernie's an old white guy, he's worthless, like that type of shit. And I think that's really dumb for pretty obvious reasons. If I had to lay some out, it would be that Bernie Sanders is the sole figure who has radicalized politics in the direction of leftism over the past 5 years, roughly. Now, of course, he didn't do this on his own, so saying solely might be a bit overdramatic or hyperbolic, but he was certainly the forerunner and the beginning of the wave which has come since Bernie, which hasn't been a lot. But if you have an understanding of American politics, like a decent understanding of American politics as they are today, you would recognize that having Bernie Sanders call himself a democratic socialist, having the Justice Democrats being founded back in 2016, having people like AOC, Rashida Tlaib, all coming into positions of power and being pretty progressive. I think some of these political people, representatives of government, I think to a degree might be hiding their power level a bit. They all consider themselves progressives, but I think they probably lean a little bit further left than they lead on. That's perfectly fine with me. I don't have a problem with that. But Bernie is most certainly the one who helped manifest. I don't know if manifest is the right word. He helped bring that movement along, and we owe a lot to him for that. It has radicalized a lot of normal people, a lot of people who are, less politically engaged than maybe you and I are. And I think there's a lot of value to that. Now, if you want to make criticisms of how Bernie has handled things, if you feel like he's essentially just caved and capitulated to the DNC and to the to people like Joe Biden and so on, I can understand that. I do feel a bit at a loss with. I don't understand quite what Bernie's strategy is right now. I don't know really what he's doing. But I'm not fucking Bernie Sanders. Like, I'm not in a position of political power. And I don't know. I don't know that I have the political wherewithal to really make genuine, meaningful critiques of what Bernie's strategy is right now. I think he dropped out because it was because of two reasons. One of which was it seemed fairly unlikely that he would secure the nomination through votes at the time, and then two, we had the coronavirus, and I think Bernie understood that this was a moment where people should not be out voting and casting ballots, and where we should not be focused on an election, but one where we should be focused on the public health and the well-being of the public. And Bernie wanted to focus on that, and I think that's pretty admirable. I think those are probably the two primary reasons he dropped out. I'm sure there might be others. Perfectly fine. So think I've lost my train of thought a bit, but oh yeah. So in this video, people are just dunking on Bernie, and it's 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 kind of annoying seeing that type of shit. It's not really productive or useful, and you again can make some arguments for recognizing the reality that we can't rely on Bernie for much longer. I do think that's true, but we will get to that a little bit later on. Okay, so that's how the video kind of begins. However, Vaush lays out his basic thesis of the video is, um, you know, stop whining. Go. You should vote for Biden, and if you don't vote for Biden, you're. I don't know how to respectfully characterize the language that Vaush and the rhetoric that Vaush uses in this video. Um, I mean, I only watched it once. I watched the whole thing, but it was very hard for me to get through. As someone who sympathizes with the feelings of a person who is disenfranchised by the system, because I am one, and I understand how people feel. Um, it was very hard to listen to someone moralize about how you need to vote for Biden or else you're a piece of shit human being, which is a bit hyperbolic, but not only so much. I mean, at the beginning of the video, Vaush begins by saying if you don't vote, if you're not in agreement with him, you have a low IQ, which, okay, yeah, maybe that's, I'm sure that's hyperbolic, but he's still insulting the listener. Um, Beyond that, he essentially says, fuck you if you don't vote for Biden. Okay, whatever. Um, I see the issue with what Vaush is doing, and my perspective, is not his core arguments, which I think is, I will grant and I agree with, which is you should vote for Joe Biden. If you're making a harm reduction argument, I think that's a very strong argument that you can make, and Vaush has made it many times before. We'll make it again, but he makes it poorly here because there are several reasons to make a video of the nature with which Vaush made this video, which I think is just a clip from a live stream. I'm not sure. And the general purposes of a video like this are calls to action, or maybe trying to persuade people who might not be on your side. Now, I think Vaush, maybe he has another reason for this video. I don't know. I can't really talk to him. If he wants to have a talk, I'd be okay to do that. But I doubt he has any intention or will to. That's perfectly fine. Vaush fails on both of these fronts. The call to action of just vote is essentially a meaningless, what's the word I'm looking for? Not a cliche, but overall a meaningless call to action. Like, people are gonna vote, and just telling people that you're just browbeating people into voting. Like, no one who was not gonna vote before watching that video is going to feel compelled to vote after watching that video. You're not persuading the opposition here. I think the saying is, you can catch more bees with honey, right? And in this video, he incessantly moralizes and browbeats the leftists to which he disagrees with. And I think this approach to the argument and this rhetoric is pretty counterproductive, especially coming from someone who seems to, or claims to at least, be a strong proponent of leftist unity, of anti-sectarianism, and of wanting to build a leftist coalition. For you to go and make a video essentially attacking your ideological allies while cozying up to and sucking the teat of the DNC, which has historically oppressed leftists and communists and has, of course, the middle and lower class for decades. For you to turn on those which are your ideological allies, which you may have disagreements with, but for you to turn and tell them, hey, fuck you, bend the knee to the system which you are disaffected by, which you are disenfranchised by, which is letting you die. I mean, who's convinced? No one who wasn't already in agreement with him already. I said already twice. Whatever. Okay. This perpetuates itself even further with Vaush just having a day on Twitter where he is epically trolling leftists. I mean, it really reminds me of the Destiny anti-leftist arc where he just lost his shit for several days and was just talking about how workers are fucking dumb and all leftists are idiots. I mean, there seems to be a bizarre similarity here. Okay. However, I'm sure a lot of people are talking about this, and I don't want to dwell on the Vaush bullshit for too long. So moving past that, a few months ago, a common point of discussion was the Bernie or bust people who said they would not vote in the general election, November 2020. Gosh, unless it was Bernie Sanders on the Democratic ticket. That's the Bernie or bust position. And then you had the vote blue, no matter who people who said, I don't care who it is, as long as we have someone on the Democratic ticket, I'm going to vote for them over Trump. Now, that discussion is largely over because it doesn't apply anymore. Bernie Sanders, you can't be Bernie or bust anymore, really, because Bernie has advocated for and put his weight behind Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and he's told his supporters to vote for them. So that isn't a tenable position. And vote blue no matter who doesn't apply either because it's just Joe Biden. So, the conversation has now come to, are you going to vote for Biden, or are you not going to vote, or are you going to vote third party, or are you going to vote for Trump? And if you're going to vote for Trump, I don't think we need to have a discussion. Okay? So that was the discussion, the point of discussion then. However, many people who had been set in this or that camp these camps have just mutated into what I've just described, which is the Vaushes, the people who are very insistent upon the moral good of voting for Joe Biden, and the doomer-pilled lefties who say, fuck this system, we're done with electoral politics, that kind of a thing. So you have these two camps now, which are similar to the former, but are of a different transformation, mutation, whatever. And let me just, as a brief aside, I just want to say that in my discussions with the vote blue no matter who types, who are still present, still making the same arguments, but just for Joe Biden, kind of to a degree, I have found them, and I don't say this of Vaush, but other types, I have found them to be the most insufferable, condescending, self-righteous, morally indignant dickheads I have ever had the displeasure of conversing with. Um, Now, I think you can come to this conversation in good faith, but often these people are so fucking so convinced and self-assured of this what I think is a relatively weak argument. I think it's one of the better arguments you can make, but I still think it's a weak argument, for reasons I can get into. But these people are constantly, again, moralizing to those who were in opposition to their incessant need for you to vote for Joe Biden. Um, it's so gratuitous and frustrating that it makes me want to say, "Fuck it, I won't vote for Joe. Fuck everything. Fuck you. Like, just stay the fuck away from me. Mind your goddamn business." I mean, it really frustrates me because while I again grant the argument and agree with it, I find the rhetoric that is being utilized and the approach that they take is absolutely reprehensible, and it's not convincing anyone. It's at least not the opposition. Maybe you could convince people who were in the middle, who were in the fence, but you're not convincing the person you're arguing with most of 99% of the time. You're not. Now, if you came to the table and said, "Hey, look, it's a free it's a free country. It's a democracy. Vote for whoever you want." But Trump is a existential threat to the American people. He's dangerous. We need to get this fucking Cheeto man. You need to get the Cheeto man out of the White House, right? You come to it with that. You make your arguments. You make them in good faith and with respect to the person you're talking with. You might have a chance of actually convincing them. Now, I can understand being frustrated with the opposition, as it were. But again, let's bear in mind that the quote unquote opposition here is still your ideological ally. And I firmly believe that if you are a leftist, you have more in common with an anarchist or with the Marxist Leninist than you do with the fucking liberal. I fundamentally believe that. You share similar goals, and while they may not be the same, or you may get to those goals in different ways, you want more than most liberals do. The closest you could get to leftists as a quote unquote liberal, I think, is a sock dem. Some people call them leftists. I don't know if I'd even grant that. I think, but whatever. Sock dems can be fine and good. Social democrats or democratic socialists, I'm a little more keen to that label, but regardless. All that being said, what is my what's my final point here? I We'll just get into anecdote Andy for a second here. I barely fucking slept last night. I think I got 4 hours of sleep total. I had to work in the searing heat today after getting no sleep, and it sucked. But I couldn't sleep last night because I was thinking about all of this and how frustrated I am, by the pervasive bad faith being propagated by people who claim to be working in the interest of leftist unity, quote unquote. It really does bother me because while we're all here shooting the shit about whether or not you should vote Biden, there are much bigger issues at play, um, for the good of humanity and for leftists in general. So let's move on to that. As I mentioned before, Bernie Sanders is who we have to thank for what is now a semblance of a leftist movement in the US. Leftist movements have been choked out and suffocated since the Cold War. And many movement leaders, including members of Black Panther, Black Panthers like Fred Hampton, who were socialists, and civil rights leaders in the 60s, quite literally murdered by the police and the CIA. Now, that's not entirely because of their leftist views or their views on class, but I imagine that was most certainly a part of it. But I don't want to reduce a civil rights era to a analysis of class by any means. Broader point here is that the suffocation of leftist movements has been pervasive in the U.S., again, since the Cold War, and the propagation of anti-communist Red Scare propaganda has also been pervasive in tandem with that. The word communism the word communism leaves people to react with a gut, knee-jerk reaction of evil, of death, and so on. And this is through years and years and decades of propagandizing, of giving one side of history, and not teaching about movements which at the time were not being at least co-opted by a capitalist system, right? So that is starting to be undone. And again, this is just a first wave, and it's very small. I think it's really important to acknowledge how I don't want to minimize what we are living through currently and make it seem unimportant, but I want to magnify how dim the light is, how dim the flame is. And what does that mean? What I mean is that the movement for leftist ideas, for class consciousness, for anti-capitalism are very, very dim. We're just beginning to see the light of it, right? And we are just at the foot of it, at the foot of the ocean, of the abyss, whatever you want to say. It's a good thing, right? But we could easily extinguish the flame, right? And I think it's really important that instead of being on Twitter, and this is partially me, this is me calling myself out, instead of being on Twitter and fucking bitching back and forth about Biden or bust or what the fuck ever, that we be having serious, meaningful discussions about building leftist infrastructure in this country, about engaging in local politics and local movements, whatever that might be. If you have to join the DSA, even if you're not a socialist, you maybe join the fucking DSA. I don't know. That's what we're going to get to. but how vital it is that we don't let this moment pass, that we don't let the flames die. I think that's really important. And instead of being caught up in petty squabbles, that we return to the drawing board. Yes, Bernie Sanders lost. And we do have to have a discussion about how we're going to handle this election. But moving beyond the election, beyond just basic electoral politics, we need to talk about structuring. We need to talk about collectivization. We need to talk about organization building. You know, it's really vital that we keep our eyes on the ball here. Now, I think I've expressed my point here pretty poignantly. Now, this is where I don't have the answers, okay? I don't know what we do moving forward, okay? I don't know. I mean, should you join the DSA? Should you join the SRA? This, again, is going to differ depending on where you are. But I want to try to set the table for that discussion, and that we move beyond our what I think are silly disagreements currently, and talk about the bigger picture. I think that's really important. And beyond that, I think it's even more, especially important, to express the value in choosing and using your words carefully, especially when talking to someone who you're supposed to be ideologically allied with, or at least on the same side as, right? The leftist movement in the US and many other first world countries, but especially the US, is extremely small. We have no political power, okay? When Biden gets in office, he doesn't have to capitulate to us. He doesn't have to give us fucking anything, because we don't have political power, because we don't have organizations which can force the hands of someone like Joe Biden or the DNC. We just don't fucking have it, okay? So we're going to keep having this fucking argument until we build that infrastructure. And this argument, which has been pervasive for decades, where people tell leftists, this isn't the time for your principles, this is the time for you to suck it up and vote for the lesser of two evils. We're going to keep having that fucking argument until we have political leverage and political power. Okay? So, all that being said, I'm open to ideas. I have been engaged locally on some degrees. I'd like to do more of that and get more engaged locally. And I encourage you and compel you to consider to do the same, to be very careful as well, to find allies, be wary of exposing yourself in terms of showing your identity, and be smart and careful. Right now, there are a lot of other problems going on that are plaguing us. Obviously, the coronavirus is still quite an issue. We have issues of civil justice. Is that the word I'm looking for? Criminal justice, however you'd like to put it. There's a lot happening, but I do think that this is where we need to go moving forward, because Bernie is not going to carry us farther, guys. Like, he's just not. I mean, I'd like to think he will, but he had a massive grassroots movement. He had really good infrastructure, but it doesn't look like he's doing anything with that now. I don't know if he could be. I don't know if he could have reappropriated his organizers and so on to work in this political moment, I cannot say, but it's not happening, and we need to fill in the gaps. Okay. Okay. So unless anyone has any questions, I think that's everything I wanted to say. I feel pretty good about that.